and we'll just close on this note, but I was looking at some of the assets. I mean, I think you're going to have a hell of a hard time explaining to people. We got 24 athletic clubs, 16 garages and parking lots, 38 marinas and boatyards, 51 mobile home parks, 13 nursing and retirement homes, 62 ranches and pastures, 162 resorts and golf courses. You're going to have a tough time letting somebody come back in and operate a golf course and tell some guy in South Boston or somewhere that it's okay for them to bail them out, reinstituted him, and let him walk off with profit from that thing. And I caution, I really think that would be an enormous mistake.
I'm not RTC, but I will say I don't think they would allow that.
Beg your pardon?
The real problem has been trying to get adequate services for certain things that the RTC needs. I mean, relative to letting them take over property they've owned previously at this bargain kind of a price, I don't think that's happened, to my knowledge at least.
Well, there's nothing in the system that prevents it.
I think there's names associated with all those assets. Now, I suppose that if one came in with a different corporate title and they didn't tie the two names together, it's conceivable that could happen.
Well, that's what the New York Times article specifically suggested. What they will do is put together a new entity.
I see. That's possible. I have not seen.
And they'll create a whole new title, and unless you have the people to be able to check out who's coming in, you're not going to know the difference. And you're going to have the XYZ Corporation buying the YAW Corporation, and you won't know it. And these same people, and they can even sit there today and say, hey, let's go belly up, and they'll put it on the dump, and we'll come back and pick it up, and we'll bid for it then. And I think you've got to have the personnel in place to prevent that kind of fraud, because I think people find it intolerable.
Senator, we have just recently initiated a program to comprehensively review every single institution that has been sent to the RTC to identify individuals who are deserving of broad prohibition from the entire banking industry. And we expect to do that with each institution that is now forwarded to the RTC.
And I commend you for that. I mean, you know, this is not just, you know, this isn't a Chrysler bailout. This is not just another thing. This is the biggest financial crisis in the history of the United States.
The biggest financial crisis in the history of the United States, says Senator John Kerry from Massachusetts. Hi, I'm Kevin Montague, Managing Director for Opal Star Industries. You're here at my office today so I can take some time with you to make you more familiar of Opal Star's involvement in the toy and game industry, and more specifically concerning our new award-winning product, the $1 Million Bank Game. What you just saw was an excerpt from the Senate Banking and House meeting, which took place on June 21st of 1990. Present at that meeting were Alan Greenspan, who is the chairman of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve Board. Paul Fritz, Director of Division of Enforcement for the FDIC, was also present. Robert Clark, who is the Controller of Currency for the United States. And Timothy Ryan, the Director of the Office of Thrift Supervision, was also present. Now, the purpose of this presentation will be to show you the things that we knew that preceded the U.S. banking crisis, and highlights concerning our research and development concerning our investigations into the toy and game industry. The two bases of information were brought together under my direction and guidance for the creation and the marketing of the $1 Million Bank Game. Now, as any good student of economics would do in a situation like this concerning the changes that are taking place in the U.S. economy and the U.S. banking system, some questions are indeed in order. And I'd like to propose some of those to you that you should be thinking about as you watch this presentation. The first question is the U.S. banking crisis happening by chance, or is it planned? Well, when we look back to 1982, there were 9,000 savings and loans in existence here in the United States. In November of 1983, Ronald Reagan signed a bill into legislation that permitted the deregulation of the savings and loans laws. As you know, the Congress is responsible for enforcing laws that are passed, and they have an army of regulators that go out and police each bank to make sure that they are complying to the laws that are currently legislated into the system. Presently, as a result of that deregulation, as we all well know from the news we've been seeing on the TV over the last few years, there are 2,000 remaining savings and loans left in the system. On June 27th of 1991, Bill Seidman addressed the Senate Banking Committee and told Congress that there were 1,000 of the 12,000 commercial banks in trouble. And in spite of this warning, Congress prepares to deregulate the commercial banks. And as we all know, it was the deregulation of the savings and loans that caused most of the savings and loans to fail. Now, Congress and the Federal Reserve Board are pro-interstate banking. Now, a very logical question at this point in time, if you're a student of government law and of national economics, would be to ask the question, why? Well, if we go back to the Nixon era, we will see that during that administration, a project had been proposed whereby Nixon addressed all the members of the United Nations to come together and form a one-world banking system. That project name at the time was called the Grand Design. Now, another logical question in light of that information would be to ask, is deregulation being used to usher in this one-world banking system? And what about the antitrust laws? You know, those laws were created to make sure that no single industry monopolized a marketplace here in the United States, thereby affording equal competition in the marketplace and a system of checks and balances. If indeed they go ahead and legislate in the deregulation of the commercial banks, will we then wind up with just a remaining residue of savings and loans in commercial banks? And if so, will computers be used to link the remaining commercial banks together as a way to get around the antitrust laws in an effort to create a one-world banking system? Full impact of the savings and loan debacle got full media attention starting back in June of 1990. Since then, a Pandora's box of corruption and intrigue has hung over the mere mention of the U.S. banking system. So to understand the answers of these questions, some basic knowledge is required. But where do you begin? Do we all just run out to our local bank and grab every banking brochure there is? As you know, most of us don't really understand the legalese that's in those brochures as much as they try to use their diagrams and drawings to get the message across to tell us how the system operates. But is there a better way? Well, there is, and we've created it, and it's called the $1 Million Bank Game. Now what follows is a 2-minute montage of news articles that I thought you might like to see that were taken from our archives, and they show the evolving U.S. banking crisis from 1983 to the present, 1992. It was during this time that the major research and development took place concerning the creation and the marketing of the $1 Million Bank Game. And if we could, let's take a look at that segment right now. you enjoyed that montage. That a musical piece that you heard is appropriately titled "Alert the Nation." What we're going to do now is you're going to be seeing a lot less of me during the rest of the presentation, though you'll see me from time to time. The bank game has a rather intriguing history. What I'm going to attempt to do through a series of letters, news articles, documents, all kinds of visual aids, is to show you from our archives how we were tracking the growth of interest in the board gaming field over the last 10 years and the growing intrigue in the U.S. banking system, and how the two, as they were coming together, made for a very interesting background for the introduction of the $1 Million Bank Game into the marketplace. Our timing couldn't have been better, in other words, and the foresight on my part was certainly impeccable. One thing I will say, the subject matter of the banking system has not been captured in a board game format since 1883. And the idea for the $1 Million Bank Game started back in April of 1981 at a casual business meeting. I had met with a friend of mine who was the executive producer for a series of films called The Omen, which were out around that time period. Robert Munger was the executive producer. And at lunch, or I should say more afterwards, after the lunchtime, the idea had come up about producing a game, especially a board game, that would capture the American banking system. And the idea was further proposed to introduce it to the banks first to use as a giveaway premium, thereby making the game stand out against all other games in the marketplace when it hit the retail marketing level. I liked the idea. After the meeting, no one seemed to do anything to pursue it except me, and 8 weeks later I had proposed a formulation, since I had involvement with the banking industry at the time. And little by little, I started to do more and more research and development for the product and the marketing angle. And obviously, we're much further down the line since that moment in time. At any rate, once the original formulation of the game was completed, I secured copyrights, U.S. copyrights for the board game. The original game was called just The Bank Game. And through 1982 to 1983, the game went through 3 rendering stages of rewriting. It was renamed in the second unpublished edition to the $1 Million Bank Game. And the reason why I expanded the name was I wanted to more accurately capture what the goal of the game is about. And the goal has not changed even from the first published edition, and the idea, that idea being to the first player to be a $1 million depositor with the bank after having repaid all their loans wins the game. Very simple premise. And from there, everything else evolved around that premise. In each case, as each of the renderings was completed, I secured U.S. copyrights for the board game. Then in 1983, we took a photograph of the third unpublished edition, which was added to a presentation package, and that presentation package was sent to over 150 U.S. savings and loans and commercial banks. Exposure began shortly after completion of the third edition. So as soon as we got that photograph ready, we went right away to approaching the commercial banks and savings and loans. I continued this exposure from June of 1983 to June of 1984, and actually that all took time, talking to various different officers of the banks and the marketing divisions and getting their feedback and their feel for what we had already done at that point in time. Then in August of 1983, Liz McCardle, who was the head of the gift premium division for Bank of America, got a copy of the third unpublished edition and got very excited about the whole thing, and I called her And that started the beginnings of potential negotiations for using the $1 Million Bank Game as a giveaway premium with Bank of America. And then on August 10th of '83, the Daily News published an article entitled "Deregulation is on Horizon." A lot of people might have thought that to be a very innocent thing, and I did too at the time, but I kept the article because during that time there was the chance that the deregulated laws might interfere with my negotiations with Bank of America. Other articles from newspapers suggested a trend in caution with bank growth. Now, talks with Bank of America continued into November of 1983, and during that time I had spoken to the FHLB and a few other banking organizations. It gets to be pretty entangled out there. You should see my Rolodex with the amount of names and numbers I had to contact. But I was very interested in whether this deregulation thing was going to go through, as Liz McCardle had indicated to me that it could have an impact on our marketing negotiations in using the $1 Million Bank Game at Bank of America as a giveaway premium. At any rate, the savings and loan deregulation passed in the Senate that November. Reagan did sign it into law, and the bank game project was put on hold by Bank of America because of the deregulated laws. They were now not being governed as strictly by the government regulators, and as a result could get into all kinds of other potential things in the marketplace that would be able to raise money for the banks, because the banks want to make a profit too. At the very end of the year, the TMA, that's the Toy Manufacturers Association, national statistics shipments for the year end showed that the major category for games and puzzles, that would be non-electric, had climbed from $215 million to $514 million in national sales performance. Now, this is going to be very important. As each year passes, I am going to bring in those figures again so you can see the growing trend as all the forces come together which favor the appearance of the $1 Million Bank Game. In 1984, I had met a gentleman by the name of Randy Spears of Mitsui Manufacturers Bank in the attempt to get an SBA loan to properly finance the $1 Million Bank Game project, and in thinking in terms of the retail marketplace. I couldn't get the banks interested quite yet, but Randy Spears had suggested that I try approaching the private sector to see if I could create 5,000 to 10,000 units of the game, and thereby further interesting the banks once I did a sell-through into the retail pipeline. So later on that year, in May of 1984, because I had been scratching my head, literally, and was asking myself, okay, now where do I make the connections for that kind of venture capital? In May of that year, I, oddly enough, attended my high school reunion, and I had teamed up with a former classmate of mine after telling him what I was working on, who was interested in what I was doing. And after that reunion, we got together, and he liked what he saw, and he says, well, if you're going to raise venture capital, you're going to need a business plan. And he says, I can help you do that. So that began a business relationship whereby he offered his services to help me to prepare that business plan. I then brought in another gentleman by the name of Jim Abernathy, who I felt might be instrumental in the event that we fully capitalized. We would need someone to handle the office in terms of the production end of the product. I knew I was going to have my hands full handling the general administrative, and my accounting friend could handle, of course, the accounting. So from June to December, we worked on 2 business plans. In 3 months, we had an initial plan that showed a 1-year projection of sales. We showed that to a few potential investors. They wanted a 2-year projection of sales, so we went back and continued to beef up our pro formas and continued to expand our written text of the business plan. Towards the end of that year, the TMA national statistics shipments for year-end in games and puzzles had climbed from $514 million to $1.043 billion in national sales performance. Dollar sales, in other words, had climbed 103%, and unit sales had risen 23%. Now, from a manufacturing standpoint, you're more interested in the unit sales because it's very easy to increase the price of a product, which would account for the dollar sales rising. But when you see unit sales rising, that means there's growth in a particular field, and that's very encouraging, especially when you're drumming up venture capital and you're looking to put a product out into the marketplace. Also at this time, Trivial Pursuit was just saturating the marketplace, which accounts for the fact why the industry went up to $1.043 billion that year, and that had been preceded by a card game called Uno, which had done extremely well in the marketplace, both games of which had opened up the entire category for interest in the board gaming field. A lot of people have asked me over the years why I didn't do a electronic game, and I said, well, it's been discussed, and we have had people look at it in terms of what it will cost and take to translate it into a computer game, but with the industry so prevalent in terms of interest in the board gaming field, not just domestically but internationally, is very, very good. We have not found it necessary to go into the computer field, and it's better that way because it just costs more money and more time. Every time you go into a new market, you've got more headaches to take care of. So we're conquering one field at a time. In 1985, throughout the year, I continued to approach venture firms with our business plan, and it was at this time that numerous newspapers and magazines I was reading showed a trend growing in the economic environment of the nation, which suggested a pending economic upheaval approaching upon the nation's economy. Now, it was also at this time that discussion among the new members that were with me had taken place about creating a first published edition of the $1 Million Bank Game, since the other three that had been created were unpublished editions, more for research and development work and need. It was now time to create a first published edition, and so we started to go to work on that. In March of that year, Esquire magazine published an article entitled Trivia Incorporated. It's a simple board game, but for its founders the prize was joy, sorrow, and multi-million-dollar conglomerate. Trivial Pursuit peaked at the end of 1984. It saturated the marketplace in terms of interest and buying power was concerned on the part of the end users that were out there that wanted a copy of the game. Knight Ridder newspaper syndicate states that 30 million copies sold by the end of 1984. Now, in June of 1984, while collecting production bids for our business plan, I became friends with the owners of Wilkinson Lithograph. Later in that year, with only $9,000 of capital raised, I struck a creative deal with the printer to create 10,000 copies of the $1 Million Bank Game. Production did begin on the first published edition once that deal was struck. By this time, I had involved the limited assistance of not only my accounting friend from Price Waterhouse, but a new graphics designer and 2 new attorneys. I remained the focal point, orchestrating each person's involvement in the $1 Million Bank Game. By Christmas of that year, I convinced Mr. Steve McLean of the May Company stores to give us 10 of their best stores to launch the product. And he stipulated that as long as we had the inventory ready for fourth quarter sales, he would give us 10 of their best stores. We pushed for that stipulated release date. However, difficulties and personality conflicts arose among the members I had delegated the work to. As a result, it was impossible to meet the release date for Christmas of 1985 as a result. To complicate matters further, the printer, Wilkinson Lithograph, that I had struck the deal with, went into bankruptcy after being 33 years in business because they had contracted a deal with a firm out of New York that failed to pay them, and that was a sizable amount of money. So at any rate, we were left with a bit of a problem. Let's see, now the TMA National Statistics shipments at the end of that year for games and puzzles showed that the industry took a drop from $1.04 billion to $642 million in national sales performance. In other words, dollar sales dropped by 38% and unit sales dropped by 24%. And we expected that drop to happen, especially after Trivial Pursuit had saturated the marketplace and there were no trends in the wind to suggest that there would be another product that would keep the national sales figures up over the billion-dollar mark. At any rate, obviously we had a little dilemma with our printer, and before I tell you what happened, in 1986, as we moved from 85 to 86, on January 28th of 1986, there was an article in the Daily News, and it was entitled, "B of A has billions at stake as oil plunges." So obviously we can see that Bank of America is in a bit of trouble, and there are already some red flags showing that there's some problems going on in the banking industry, which intrigued me, considering we were working on this idea of capturing the American banking system in a board game atmosphere. So the work continued. We hooked up with a new lithographer printer, thanks to my strong relationship with the printer that was going under. Though we did lose that first printer, the deal for creating 10,000 games with that printer fell through. We could create 1,000 games, but more money was needed. I managed to secure a personal loan while continuing to work with another investor by the name of Charles Ryan, who continued to remain interested in the project and is with me even until today. As a result of a lot of the problems that took place during that time, a lot of blame in my mind could be passed on to some of the individuals that were involved, and as a result, and these did not happen overnight, but I decided to release a few people from the project. The accountant was one of the people that had to go because he was bucking for my job, and since the graphics designer that he had brought in was loyal to him, the graphics designer took place, but that's all right because we've replaced him several times over with new people, brighter people, people that are loyal to me. On February 8th of 1986, another article appeared in the Daily News, and it was entitled, "Crocker Sold to Wells Fargo." So right away now we have a merger taking place, and that was another little indicator to me that something was cooking. Having tested the remaining people, in spite of our false start in 1985, I decided to incorporate us under the name of Falcon Games Unlimited, a California corporation. That became effective on March 6th of that year. And as a highlight note, a new trend started to come into the toy game industry. In June, major distribution of the Pictionary game created by Rob Angel had begun. And we all know that that resulted in the creation of the Games Gang and the tremendous success that took place with the Pictionary game. By August, a final assembly on the $1 Million Bank game had begun, and then afterwards we sent out 100 of the completed first edition bank games to savings and loans and commercial banks in the field. On September 16th of 1986, I got a call from a Mr. Edward Carson, who was the CEO for First Interstate Bank at that time, who was extremely excited about the $1 Million Bank game and encouraged me to meet with Mr. Terry Rosen, the marketing officer for their bank, and Marcy Redinger, their advertising project coordinator. At the meeting, Mr. Rosen told me they had received the prior material I had sent them regarding the third unpublished edition of the $1 Million Bank game, and they liked the idea even then, but the DIDC rules and regulations had boxed them in a corner prior to our meeting there in September 16th, which I already knew about. The previous law had stated that a bank could get involved in an educational item as a giveaway premium, but they could spend no more than $5 per unit on such an item. The new law that had just passed allowed them to spend as high as $20 per unit, and that was perfect for our manufacturing stipulations and requirements, and that's why they called me in. So it shows you that being persistent and trying to get the lowdown on things eventually pays off. Now, during that meeting, they did ask why depositors would be interested in a board game as a giveaway premium. I effectively answered that at that time. They were quite satisfied with my answers. They wanted to integrate the First Interstate Bank name into the game, which we had proposed to them earlier anyway, and I said that was no problem, we'd give them permission. And they also wanted permission to possibly make some graphical changes regarding their specific needs, and again, we agreed to give them copyright permission to do that. And on September 17th of 1986, the following day, there was an article in the LA Times which said that reads as follows: B of A denies rumor of collapse or sale. Another major indicator that some problems were happening with the commercial banking industry. Now, going back to the $1 Million Bank game, since we had just completed our production run and we had sent out copies of the game to the savings and loans and banks, one of my attorneys at that time suggested that I autograph all the games. His idea being that what would have happened if the first 5,000 Monopoly games had been autographed by Charles Darrow when he released them at the Philadelphia store that he did after being rejected by Parker Brothers and Milton Bradley at that time. And I said, well, they'd probably be worth the handsome penny right now. So having great faith that we were onto something that had the potential of going big, I went ahead and autographed the first 1,000 copies of the $1 Million Bank game. Since it was too late in the year to make arrangements to exhibit at the 1987 New York International Toy Show, I decided to make focus on the 1988 show as a launch date for the retail marketplace in exposing the $1 Million Bank game. In October 7th of 1986, the LA Times had another article, and it read, "First Interstate Seeks Takeover of B of A." So we're back to B of A having its troubles, but what was a real kicker was this article that came out of the Daily News on October 20th, which read, "Competitive upheaval is on banking's horizon." Now we start to see an indicator telling us something's wrong, possibly wrong with the banking system. At the end of the year, the TMA National Statistics shipments for games and puzzles showed that the industry had climbed from $611 million to $760 million in national sales performance. So dollar sales had risen 24%, and unit sales had risen another 17%. And like I said again, we like to see that unit sales climbing because that tells us that there's growth in the industry and that there isn't just a hike in price on the retail end so the retailers can try to cover their overhead because of possibly a slow-performing system or slow-performing industry. Now in 1987, since we obviously couldn't get to the New York Toy Show, I continued to work the retail market, but on a local level, and I started to acquire stores locally to get the inventory out. During the latter half of the year, I prepared for the 1988 show, and just saying those two statements was a handful. It certainly kept me busy all through the year. At the end of 1987, we look back at the TMA National Statistics shipments for games and puzzles, and we can see once again that the industry had climbed, or that particular category had climbed from $760 million to $861 million in national sales performance. The dollar sales rose again, this time 13.3%, and the unit sales rose also again 12.6%. And now that takes us into 1988, and I'm on a plane, hopping a plane to New York for the New York International Toy Show, and where I stayed with some friends in the Queens area, and which was kind of nice. It's a lot better than staying in a hotel. After the show, I responded to some 100 inquiries regarding the $1 Million Bank game. That kept me pretty busy. And in April 17th of that year, the Daily News published a news article that was not a little red flag anymore, but now it's a major red flag. And the article read, "Please borrow. Lenders growing desperate to drum up business offer an array of gimmicks." So at any rate, we started to see that there were some problems creeping in with the major banking industry. And here in the United States, in August of that year, we got a call from Phil Vitale with the Chicago Tribune. And every year for the last 5 years at that time, they had been releasing their Thanksgiving Christmas edition that showed an array of all the new products in the toy and game industry that were out, and they had a special edition devoted to the gaming industry, board games and electronic, and they wanted to feature us. So we now received our first small editorial plug from the Chicago Tribune, and a lot of people may not think that's a big deal, but if you're conducting a master plan like I was doing, you know that that's just a stepping stone to bigger and better things that are on the way. Now, on August 11th of 1988, an article appeared in Rolling Stone magazine, and this finally was the trigger that made it clear to me that something really big was coming in terms of the savings and loan and the commercial banking system here in the United States. And the article read, "The growing crisis in our S&L industry." I realized that eventually this thing was going to snowball and reach major proportions based on everything else I was monitoring, not just the news articles, but the TV programs and the people I was talking to in my business circles around the nation. And I realized that I wanted to be the first person in the marketplace with a game effectively capturing the American banking industry when the whole thing hit the fan, as it were, and got major attention by the news media. Now, I realize this article, dated August 11th, 1988, appeared 2 years before major television coverage of the U.S. Banking crisis came to being. So then in September 28th of 1988, another article by the Daily News came out, and it was entitled, "Some California Banks Opening on Sunday." Now, you may ask what the significance of this particular article is. Well, if I were in a business where I was having some trouble, I would be looking to expand my operating hours. A lot of the banks had already expanded their hours to late into the evening, some as late as 6, 7 o'clock at night, 5 days a week, including Saturdays, and now they were looking to operate on Sunday. So that was a very interesting indicator to me, telling me, in line with the Rolling Stone magazine, that this thing was growing faster than I realized. In November, I received a call from Dee Middleton, who wanted to use the bank game with her Lamarty trays. Shortly after that call, Dee and I started to network together, but the real thing that clinched the relationship was when she sent me a copy of the Lamarty trays, and when I received it in the mail and opened it up after we had talked on the phone and held them in my hands began to shake like a dividing rod, you know, when you're looking for water. And I sat there and I looked at them and I said, "Oh my God," I said, "we've got $1 million product here." And I was very, very excited about what I was seeing. At this point in time, I'd seen quite a lot of stuff already concerning the toy and game industry. And it seems like you have to go through hundreds of products before you find that one nugget of gold that you know has a good chance of making it in the marketplace. At the end of that year, the TMA National Statistics shipments for games and puzzles had climbed once again from $830 million to $950 million in national sales performance. The dollar sales rose 14.5%, and the unit sales rose 6.2%. And that brings us into 1989. Now you might visualize in your mind that what's happening with the dollar sales and unit sales, if we could chart this, is we're looking at a curve that's eventually doing this. And so are the unit sales. Dollar sales up here, unit sales doing this. It's eventually starting to level off. So naturally, as we get closer to the present, the question has to be, will the interest start to decrease a little bit and then climb up again in the event that a new contender comes out and captures the marketplace? And if there are no trends, then more than likely it's going to dip down because there's no interest there, because nothing is captivating the marketplace. But we think we're holding the product that's going to do it. And let's take a step further here. In 1989, I attended my first Withra show, helping Dee Middleton with her booth in April. And she was quite excited about the $1 Million Bank Game, because when she first called me, she wanted to use it as a piece that would work with her Lamarty trays. And she had a photo session going on at the time, so naturally she wanted to include the $1 Million Bank Game in the photo session and wanted our permission, which of course we gave her. Then after April of that trade show, we received a contact from an attorney in New York representing a company called Falcon Games Limited, operating out of England. And apparently we had a little trademark conflict. Well, though we had received clearance from Sacramento to use the name Falcon Games Unlimited, our attorneys had not yet begun a trademark search at my request, because I was waiting to see where we stood in terms of the formulation of the $1 Million Bank Game and its marketing interest in the field. And I felt once all the pieces were in place, we'd go ahead and secure our trademark here in the United States. Well, we didn't have to obviously wait long, because once we exposed ourselves at the International Toy Show in New York, they found out about us. So at any rate, our attorneys talked to their attorneys and went on for 4 months. Finally, they showed us documentation, and we decided to go ahead and change the name. I favored the name Opal Star Industries because Opal happens to be my birthstone, so there was a piece of me in the name. I knew we were going to be shining, or I had the faith that we would be, and not for a short time, so I implemented the use of the word star, so that gives you the Opal Star. And then Industries takes in the whole manufacturing aspect, the reality, and as a result you have the name Opal Star Industries defined. Okay, now in August, Playthings magazine gave us an editorial spot, about 1/3 of a page, and Playthings magazine at that time circulated to all the game store retailers in the United States. And the article read, $1 Million Bank Game makes sense. Well, we were making more than sense at that time, but I did tell the gentleman that had written the article up for us that I wanted it spelled SENSE, SE, with the first S being a dollar sign. And I guess he must have forgotten and somebody goofed and they put the word cents in there. But at any rate, it was the idea that we were now getting some exposure to the trade. And in May, going back a little bit, before we got that piece from Playthings magazine, we did get a call, an initial call from a company in England called the Lawnland Corporation that wanted to represent and introduce the $1 Million Bank game to the EEC, the Expanded English Commonwealth. Well, the negotiations for that contract went on for about 6 months, and in November of that year we came to an understanding and agreement, and the contract was signed. And during that time, too, I also started to prepare for attending the 1990 New York International Trade Show for the toy and game industry. Towards Christmas of that year, we also sent out 6 cases of games to the top 3 banks in the nation, that being Chase Manhattan Bank, Citicorp, and Bank of America. And we got some very nice letters back from the CEOs that we sent the games to. They enjoyed the gift, and I think we created some good word of mouth with that approach. And then at the end of the year, the TMA National Statistics shipments for games and puzzles climbed once again at the end of 1989. And this time it had gone from $950 million to $1.043 billion in national sales performance. Again, we can define that by the dollar sales rising 9.8% and the unit sales rising 3.0%. Now, it is interesting at this point to note that what TMA was saying, if you just make a comparison, back in 1984, when Trivial Pursuit had saturated the marketplace, the industry went over $1 billion. It was up to over $1.043 billion at the end of 1984, and yet, in 1989, it was repeating that trend of buying power in the marketplace. Obviously, with all these forces going on, I said, well, the marketplace is green for the acceptance of a product like this, and we've got the U.S. banking crisis coming up on the, getting ready to expose itself in a major way, so we couldn't be better timed to have a board game ready for the American marketplace that captures the American banking system. And an educational game at that, and a very, very fun game to play, as many people have attested to. All right, that brings us up to 1990. In January 19th of 1990, the Daily News published an article, and the article was called "Time to Expose the Geniuses of Bad Banking." Well, that says a lot right there. In January, the Lawnland Corporation made their appearance at the Earl's Court Trade Show with the $1 Million Bank game. In February, I followed through in attending the New York International Toy Fair. And I figured at that time we were very, very close to the crisis involving the U.S. banking industry. And so I made a bold step, and as you, those of you who have been at trade shows know, there's always a buyer's directory whereby a buyer can look through the directory, look for a manufacturer's ad for the products that they're advertising, know what booth location they're in so they can find the manufacturer if they're interested in making any purchases from the manufacturer. So anyway, we had put a half-page ad in the 1990 New York International Toy Fair Buyer's Directory, which reads as follows, and I'll quote this. It says, "Remaining savings and loans in United States finally collapse, reads the morning paper. Will you know why? Thrift loan stores that didn't change to commercial bank status finally fail in the marketplace, blares an afternoon radio report. More bank takeovers forecasted for the future, explains a late-night TV news special. Is it all happening by chance, or is it planned?" Now, you may not think that means anything until you see what happens 4 months later. In March of 1990, I signed a contract with a company called the Investment Matchmaker Incorporated, and started to develop a close relationship with a gentleman by the name of Mr. Ron Thielen, who was very interested in the project we were working on and felt that he could be instrumental in helping to connect me to secondary venture capital into the deal. At this time, we had already put in close to over $100,000 into the project, and our needs were growing and our exposure was growing in the marketplace. The business plan that had been created a few years back had been revised already and now had to go through another major revision to catch up on what we were learning and watching in the marketplace with the changes. In addition, we continued to add retail stores to our performance record. Now, since I mentioned the fact that I had put out that wonderful buyer's half-page ad in the directory for the New York Toy Show, in June, television started to lace heavily into the savings and loan debacle and the U.S. banking crisis. So we could say effectively that the lid had flown off the kettle and that the cat was out of the bag. In July, following this exposure from the television media, which I was waiting for, I will also add that I knew that when that happened, we would start to receive indirect advertising on the $1 Million Bank Game, because everyone would be focused on the U.S. banking crisis and the whole banking system. But in July, we received a call from a Mr. Michael Ruggiero, who was the publisher of Fun and Games. Fun and Games is distributed nationally here in the United States, and Mr. Ruggiero called me because he wanted to do an editorial on the $1 Million Bank Game, and after talking with me on the phone, he was very well impressed with my business acumen and wanted to do an interview as well. Apparently one of his salesmen had purchased a copy of the $1 Million Bank Game through one of our stores in Manhattan, New York, and this was also at the time when President Bush's son, Neil Bush, had been brought up on the carpet regarding the SNL scandal, and also Charles Keating with Lincoln Savings and Loan had also been brought into the courts in relation to the scandal as well. So Mr. Ruggiero felt that our $1 Million Bank Game was very timely and deserved coverage in his publication, which is exactly what I was hoping for. So at any rate, the first exposure we got in the Fun and Games publication came out in September, in the September-October edition of that year, which resulted in an editorial and an interview. And then paralleling that, in December, the LA Times came out with an article entitled "Creating Fun Games Can Be Serious Work." Well, by now, from what you've seen of this presentation, you should know that to really develop a really good game, the marketing angle has to be there, and there's a lot of persistence and a lot of planning that's involved to make it successful. So I want to throw this article in here as a gestalt, you might say, to everything that has been shown so far. And in this article, Brian Hirsch, who had created the Outburst game and a number of other very, very good games, he talks about the Outburst game and the toy and game industry in general. The Outburst game was eventually licensed over to Western Publishing, and to the best that we know, Western Publishing sold 2.5 million units of that particular game at that point in time. In 1991, we received additional exposure in the Fun and Games publication. This would be the January-February edition, whereby Mr. Ruggiero had asked me to write an article concerning my experiences at the trade show, and I affectionately titled this article "Cutting Through the Javits Jungle." And the article basically suggested improvements that could be made at the yearly toy fair in New York. Now, most people who have gone to these shows knows that the show is split. Part of it takes place in the toy building near Fifth Avenue, and the rest of it takes place in the Jacob Javits Convention Center, which is a very new building that Toy Manufacturers Association has been using. The only problem that I pointed out in the article was I felt that the floor needed to be more organized. It wouldn't hurt if you put all the board game manufacturers together, all the electronic game manufacturers together, all the boys' toys games together, the girls' dolls together, all the plush items together. The reason being is what we've learned being at the trade shows is we've heard this time and time again, is many buyers come by whose stores only solely sell games, and they're just not interested in 2/3 of the show. They simply want to get to the to the gaming manufacturers, get their brochures, make their contacts, talk potentially sales and deals, and get out of there. As a result, since Jacob Javits is so large, these retail buyers end up getting their share of exercise, walking around the place trying to find manufacturers that are exhibiting their product line. Now, in the March-April edition of the Fun and Games publication, the commentary that I wrote at that time was affectionately titled "The Spider and the Fly." What I was trying to do was to warn potentially new inventors to beware of the unscrupulous companies that promise representing their products to major manufacturers, charge a fee of the inventor, and deliver nothing. And this is very common to every business field I have experienced in my life. There are always sharks in the water, and an inventor who has no business savvy, who's busy creating a game, but doesn't know marketing, doesn't know accounting, doesn't know law, doesn't know this, that, and all the rest of it, can very easily get swallowed up by the sharks in the water unless he knows how to recognize them before they come and get away from them, so that he doesn't wind up getting bitten. Many inventors start out with very limited funds when they get into a field, unless they're very good entrepreneurs, and they have to be very careful of what they're spending. And so I thought the article was well written, and I have everything in my office here to document and back up everything that was claimed in the article, and without naming names and specific individuals, I think it got the message across. In April, while attending the Withra Kids Expo show, I met, in 1991, I met a distributor who got very interested in the $1 Million Bank game. After the end of that show, a week later, we met in his office, and one of the most honorable men I've ever met in my life, who showed me everything in his office, all the accounts that he had at that time, and we struck a deal regarding our remaining inventory, our current remaining inventory in the $1 Million Bank game, and very promptly and very quickly, this distributor put us out into quite a number of stores, building up our retail family of OSI retailers. So we're quite pleased with that connection. The Game Retailers Network also voted the $1 Million Bank game the #1 strategy game for 1992 against 35 other contenders. Now, Opal Star received a full 2-page spread in the May-June edition of Fun and Games as a result of this award. Further, we started to do regular advertising with Fun and Games at that point. And in August, Opal Star contributed to the Persian Gulf War effort by sending some 50 games along with 50 Lamarty trays to U.S. troops in the Gulf Theater. In September and October, letters started to arrive from the Persian Gulf. In fact, we were quite pleased when we started to receive letters back, and I'd like to read one letter here. We have a number of testimonial letters on file, and it's always wonderful when you get one of these spontaneous letters that come from out of the blue praising your product. And I think this gentleman, who's a Sergeant Eric J. Christensen, has summed up the enthusiasm of everyone that has played the $1 Million Bank game and likes it. And his letter reads, "Sir, I am a major with Marine Fighter Attack Squadron 333 VMFA 333. I work on FA-18 fighter jets. We opened your game yesterday. and I played 5 straight games. I love his use of exclamation points. It is very entertaining, also at the same time challenging. To me, that's what kind of game many of us here enjoy. Here in Desert Shield, things get pretty boring at some times. This game definitely relieves some of that tension. I will certainly recommend this game to everyone. It is just so fun, and at the same time, you're learning. As a matter of fact, I may now put some money in a money market when I get back to the States. That is, if I can talk my wife into it. Sincerely, Eric J. Christensen, Sergeant, USMC. But we certainly want to thank Sergeant Christensen for his letter and his high praise of the $1 Million Bank game. 5 straight games right in a row. Gee, I'd like to know who won every game, but he didn't tell me. We also received another letter from a chaplain, Samuel J.T. Boone, and I won't share the whole letter with you, but he was very detailed in explaining the arrival of the $1 Million Bank game, how it was distributed among the men, and I will read this one part here. He says, "Again, thanks for the games. I split them up between the chaplains of our division. The guys up front were our first priority and got the bulk of the items. Samuel J.T. Boone, Chaplain Major, U.S. Army, Deputy Division Chaplain." And we were pleased to be able to send this to our fighting men regarding the pending, almost disastrous war for the United States in terms of the Kuwait operation and the Persian Gulf War. We were very pleased to see how that war turned out in the end, and that it did not become a prolonged effort as they were, as our military experts were thinking it might become. Now, in October of that year, we brought in a new player. Mr. Ron Thielen of the Investment Matchmaker introduced me to a fellow by the name of Dr. Roy Johnson, who is actively, even at this date, connecting me with venture capitalists regarding major distribution, expanded major distribution of the $1 Million Bank game. And in October of 1991, Mr. Ron Thielen effectively connected me with several venture capitalists personally, and we have talked intimately regarding the $1 Million Bank game, and those talks continue even to today. And on December 8th, the bank game shared front page space with the Lamarty Trays in the West Coast Times, which is rivaled only by the San Francisco Chronicle. We were very delighted to be a part of that coverage. The Lamarty Trays certainly belong in the front page of every newspaper, and the fact that we shared it with them was a win-win situation for both sides. On December 20th, I appeared on the Cara Talk Show, which is hosted by Maria Laria, and they are the #1 talk show on the Telemundo network, servicing the Hispanic community worldwide, and they had heard about the $1 Million Bank game, and we were allowed to appear, and I brought the $1 Million Bank game and the Lamarty Trays with me to show to their audience of viewers. So the bank game and the Lamarty Trays were seen by millions of viewers living throughout California, Mexico, Central America, Canada, Spain, and 6 other countries worldwide. Now, prior to December, I received a phone call and then a letter dated October 1st, 1991, from Mr. Michael Ruggiero, the publisher of the nationally distributed Fun and Games publication. I learned at that time that the Game Retailers Network had elected the $1 Million Bank game as their #1 choice for the best international game against some 240 contenders. Opal Star received a beautiful 2.5-foot trophy and was further honored with a 3-page spread in the December awards edition of Fun and Games. We've had numerous game players tell us what an excellent game the $1 Million Bank game is, but when peers from your own industry tell you you've got the #1 game, well, it can leave you pretty speechless. In fact, I really didn't know what to say when I got the phone call from Mr. Ruggiero. The recognition not only comes at a time when most needed, but the trophy will be a stunning addition to our future advertising efforts concerning the $1 Million Bank Game. So that brings us to the present. Here in 1992, the $1 Million Bank Game was just recently again appeared at the New York International Toy Show and was represented by the Marino Group Incorporated. I've been so busy I just didn't have time to make it this year, and we're very grateful for Charlie Marino and Clifford Gus to represent the game in their booth for us. We've had a number of inquiries already that have come in as a result of that exposure. Our plans for this year is from January to June. There will be a hefty circulation of the Fun and Games publication, the December Awards edition, showing us as the #1 international game throughout all the trade shows. Just recently, this month of March, I met with a gentleman with Global Trading and another gentleman with the Talicor Corporation, and we're currently discussing the utilization of their services for national distribution of the $1 Million Bank Game here in the United States. And that story is still being written, so you'll have to stay tuned to see how that develops. In April, this coming April, I will be at the Kids Expo show in Pomona, again assisting with Lamarty Enterprises with the Lamarty trays, while also displaying the $1 Million Bank Game in our trophy at the trade show. From July to December, we intend to do additional advertising, straight advertising with the Fun and Games publication to keep the product exposure in the forefront of the industry. We continue to add to our current retailer base of participants out in the field, and during now and December or before Christmas, we will be talking further with the TV talk shows, and we already have gained exposure on the Kara talk show, and we therefore expect to be able to utilize that to springboard us on to a number of the other TV talk shows. We've already spoken with the Donahue Show, the Oprah Winfrey Show, and a Johnny Carson Show, and we're waiting now for a decision from them to see if we will have some airtime from them. A lot of people may remember that when Trivial Pursuit was growing in the marketplace, it wasn't until Scott Abbott and Chris Haney made it onto the Johnny Carson Show that sales really started to soar for them, and you just can never get enough exposure. So anyway, that brings us now to what Opal Star's future plans are. Just so you don't think that the well goes dry with the $1 Million Bank Game, I will say this. The $1 Million Bank Game is expected to be a trilogy. The current game that's in the marketplace is what we call the branch edition. It shows how the banking industry works at the branch level while also showing the overall picture, but it basically takes the focal point and perspective of the depositor or the teller. And that will be followed by a juniors edition for ages 12 and under, a more simplified version, once this particular edition saturates the marketplace. And then the trilogy ends with what we call the Ultra edition, which will show how the entire system works at the national level, again in a more simplified manner that everyone can understand, and in an extremely fun-filled way, as we have achieved with the current edition, the current first part of the trilogy of the $1 Million Bank Game. Once the trilogy is completed, we have I won't tell you what it is, I'll just tell you lightly what it is. We have a type of word game. I've seen just about everything that's been created over the last 100 years in the industry, and I pretty well know all the formulas, so I have also seen in the last 10 years that the toy and game industry has blown it in a lot of ways and has let a lot of things go by, and we have some things on file that we know are winners, which we're going to introduce those formulas in due course of time that everyone else has failed to pick up on. So the best I can tell you is this next item will be a word type of game, and we see it as something that will have tremendous pull and potential for a type of TV game show. That then is expected to be followed by what I will call a character product line, and that's about all I'll say. I suppose I can qualify it by saying Disney had Mickey Mouse and Jim Henson had Kermit the Frog and the Muppets, and I have my little character, and when the time is ready we'll introduce him to the entire toy and game industry, and I think a lot of people are going to be pleasantly shocked and pleased to see what we're going to introduce into the marketplace. Well, at this time I would like to show you how easy it is to play the $1 Million Bank game and give you a quick demonstration of the product. So let's close it right here and let's go into the gaming parlor and show you the $1 Million Bank game.